So let me, for those of you who don't know as much about Hitchcock as others, let me just give a little background, which is that his reputation, paradoxically, was relatively low. He was, for a very long time, he was thought as merely a kind of purveyor of murder mysteries, pot boilers. It was a secondary rank. During the, I can still remember being in college in the 1960s, and there was absolutely no doubt that the major European art film directors were ranked higher than Hitchcock. They were thought to have great philosophical profundity, to speak to existential issues, like that of French, thought following World War II, etc. It was the young French critics of Cahiers du Cinéma, later on directors, Truffaut, Godard, Chabrol, who fastened on Hitchcock, who discovered him before the Anglo-American critics really did. For them, he was the model of the theory of auteurism, which is still controversial, the idea that the theory that a director has the same relationship to a film as a novelist has to a novel, or a poet to a poem. Because it's pretty clear that film is a collaborative activity. It owes a great deal to all kinds of often invisible staff members behind the scenes, et cetera. Nevertheless, they said that Hitchcock's imprint, his sensibility, his imagination was very clear in the body of his work. So now another thing that's helped the rise in Hitchcock's reputation is with the arrival of videotapes, home videotapes, then DVDs, then cable television. In the United States, Turner Classic Movies runs Hitchcock films regularly after Ted Turner bought enormous archives of the studio system period. And I thought I've been seeing Hitchcock's films, exposed to them repeatedly, and then so his reputation has built and built and built. At the Sight and Sound poll, which made international news around the world, recently, that for the first in 50 years, the film Citizen Kane, ranked as the greatest film of all time, has been displaced by Hitchcock's Vertigo. I was part of that poll, put Vertigo also at the top. It's even risen up the rank, for me. North by Northwest used to be my favorite Hitchcock film. Still, it's very dear to me. But Vertigo, it's like a life experience. The theme is obsession, and the relationship of the fans to that film is obsession. Okay, I'm one of many who've made pilgrimages, to the various spots in San Francisco where the film took place. My first visit was in the 1980s, and whenever I'm in San Francisco, if I can go to nowhere else, I walk up Nob Hill to see that magnificent apartment building with the stone courtyard where Kim Novak emerges to get into her green Jaguar. Okay, I stand there and pine and looking. Of course, the stone is starting to wear off after so many decades, et cetera, et cetera. But that to me is it's magical. The way Hitchcock, and this is a good kind of segue into this theme which I esteem in Hitchcock, which is his feeling for architecture. Okay, he right from the start, right from the period when he was still working in England, he had a great feeling for streets and public plazas, squares, for monuments on a colossal scale, whether it's the dome over at the British Museum, and later on the Statue of Liberty, Mount Rushmore, the United Nations building, and so on, or the Frank Lloyd Wright-inspired house at the end of North by Northwest, quite unlikely in the middle of what seems to be a desert landscape, and so on. And yet he's also someone who is such a genius about psychology, but the internal world. Right? I think it's almost unique. I can't imagine any other director who has had such a range of achievement. Okay, from showing almost like Edgar Allan Poe the internal turmoil, the powers of the irrational, terror and dread and anxiety and all that, and yet this external frame, how beautifully he captures space. So many of his, he could have been an artist, in my opinion. I mean, he might well have, 100 years earlier, when film was not a medium, been a painter instead of a film director. That was his great pleasure. The actual filming process bored him. He had already made all the decisions ahead of time about script, and also everything was storyboarded. So his favorite part of filmmaking was sitting at home with a male colleague, drinking wine, smoking cigars for months at a time, working out the plot, working out the storyboarding, and so on. And then when he got on the set, he had to deal with these actors, who were these frail embodiments, of his creative vision. And that's why he's so famous for his acerbic and sardonic comments about actors. He denied he had said that actors are cattle. What he said was actors should be treated like cattle, is what he said. Right? And another time, Ingrid Bergman was going through all kinds of wondering about her role and her motivation, all kinds of things, and he said, Ingrid, it's only a movie. And sometimes people spotted him dozing, like dozing in his director's chair as the acting was going on, because he had, like a bottle of wine at lunch and things like that. He was quite a gourmand. Oddly enough, although a gourmand, in his films, even when a very tempting meal is served, people can't finish it. I mean, there's something which interferes with the eating of food. Okay, it's either people are having trouble cutting it, or it's a crustacean, that you can't kind of cut through. So you watch for that motif, which is odd. He's very food conscious, and yet he denies his characters the pleasures of eating. I mean, even in To Catch a Thief, where chicken is brought out of a picnic basket, there's like these little tiny bites. That's all that Cary Grant is allowed to take, just little nips out of the side. All right, now, what else in terms of background before we move on? Now, because Hitchcock began in silent film, I feel very strongly that his silent film roots can be detected in the way he treats scripts later on. He is brilliant at the minimization of dialogue. What he would do in the process of a screenplay is to cut out dialogue and to let his camera show the psychological and emotional realities as registered in the faces of the actors. So I think that aspect of nonverbal communication in Hitchcock is one of his great points of genius. Right? He shows that most of human life is actually nonverbal, and people read each other through the little things of the eyes and little body language and so on. This shows why post-structuralism is such. I hope there are not people here who are still pursuing that dead end. Post-structuralism, which said that all of reality is mediated through language. Well, then they have never seen Hitchcock films, because everything about Hitchcock shows that nonsense. And I'll show you some examples here. But I want you to perhaps be aware how many of the great scenes in Hitchcock are really silent. They're silent. You'll hear background sounds. You'll hear ambient sounds. You'll hear the music, particularly Bernard Herrmann's great music. But a lot you can go on for 10 minutes with no dialogue, right? And you feel totally in the current of the film, all right, and that is the poetry of Hitchcock, right? To be able to communicate through mood and atmosphere, to enter the world, and language is really regarded as quite frail and insubstantial. Okay, now what else? Well, this issue about now with films coming out about Hitchcock, fictional films, and a film focusing on Tippi Hedren's terrible experiences of sexual harassment from Hitchcock and so on. I'm concerned about the return of this feminist idea of Hitchcock as a misogynist, and I've tried to talk about that in the essay that's in the 39 Steps volume. I think that Hitchcock, like many great artists of the past, male artists, has had a conflicted relationship to women. He was in love with women, and yet he feared and resented women. It's a very complicated relationship that speaks to the sort of subordinate condition that men have from the moment they're formed within a female body, which is their haunted house for 9 months, and so on. Samuel Beckett claimed that he remembered life in the womb. He remembered being stifled and suffocated by life in the womb. Do you notice how few women there are in Beckett? No one seemed to notice. That Waiting for Godot, hailed as the greatest play of the 20th century, has no women. All right, why wasn't that commented on? You see, so that is a huge vision, of the world where men have been reduced to hobos, and the world a desolate landscape with one dead dead tree, which then sprouts a leaf at the end, which is a symbol of hope. But major artists have this. I mean, you could even, Picasso, Michelangelo, this like flight from the power of women. We know that Hitchcock had a very domineering mother that he was very attached to symbiotically, and yet he feared, dreaded, and resented. And that definitely erupts into the nightmare mother, the mummified mother of Psycho, for sure. But let me just read, look, just last week, I stumbled on this. I found a 1998 special issue of People magazine commemorative about the death of Frank Sinatra, okay? And they quoted this from Frank Sinatra. Listen, he said, and this is the older Frank Sinatra, he said, "Women, I don't know what the hell to make of them, do you? Every day I know less. Maybe that's what it's all about. Maybe all that happens is you get older and you know less, okay? And you see, there it is, okay? Now, feminism would like to just sweep this away and say misogyny, this, that, and the other. No. This is the universal paradigm, okay, of men's relation to it. When Freud asked, what do women want? Okay, feminism laughed. Oh, who cares, okay, about that? Well, there's no question, what do men want? Well, women are mysteries. Women are enigmas, even to themselves. Oscar Wilde even has a maxim about that, okay? Feminism has to start listening to Frank Sinatra, okay, and stop listening to Lacan, Derrida, and Foucault. All right, now, all right. All right, but I'm just dying to get to the clips, but what else do I want to say in his background? Oh, yes. Hitchcock was a familiar and personal presence to us in the United States because of his Alfred Hitchcock Presents program. Right? My parents were very dismissive of most popular culture, but they adored Hitchcock, who would come out as this kind of lugubrious host, address the audience with his world weariness, and then suddenly appear at breaks in his storyline, okay, to introduce now for the commercial sponsor. And so, we adored it. Or he would show himself standing in a wheelbarrow or up to his neck in a swimming pool or what. He was very prankish. He was both dignified and yet constantly subverting his own dignity. That's why he has so many cameos of himself, doing absurd things, not quite making a bus, in his movies. You always spot him. There's always one moment when we'll spot him. And I think he performed a great service for my generation, which would end up in college in the 1960s. He really was the first, okay, in our home environment to point out, to bring attention to, okay, the commercial framework of mass media. All right? He was constantly talking about here I'm this artist who has to deal with the money men, etc. Okay? I mean, there were works at the time like Vance Packard, The Hidden Persuaders, being read by adults. But we young people essentially thought media, were reality, and then Hitchcock gave us a kind of oblique angle, okay, on that, commercial framework.